The following is a special presentation of Tony Kurre Radio. Want the real story behind the sound bites and headlines? Let's find the facts. Remember, it's not a conspiracy theory if it's the truth. You are not paranoid or confused. You just need to know.
Welcome in, everybody. It is time for another edition of Need to Know. Kip Kiefer on TKR. Glad to be with you as always. I think didn't spend enough time last week as I passionately described events on college campuses and different things to properly acknowledge mothers out there. We're a day removed now from Mother's Day, but I wrote a little poem yesterday and put it on my Facebook page, basically declaring that, yes, there's one day a year designated for that, but anybody who's taking a breath on another day on this earth and walks outside and looks at the sky and observes the sounds of the birds singing and the plants growing and all of the magnificent little sidebars that we get to enjoy in this life. Every single morning, every single sunrise, every stroll down the street, taking in just the sights, should be an instant trigger for everybody that every single day that we're here should be Mother's Day, because it is our mothers who made it happen, who brought us into the world, who carried us for 9 months while we developed the ability to come into the world, and my appreciation for you talk about the ultimate selfless act. A woman who becomes pregnant with a child and carries that child for 9 months, and then if that's not enough, I've witnessed 2 births, both my sons. I was front and center, a little too close, really, for comfort, because it is the most intense thing that I've ever witnessed in this life. And seeing both those guys and what the women have to do. I mean, my pain threshold is probably 0.001% of what a woman can endure. And that whole process is so remarkable, and it's such a miraculous thing. And then the job's just beginning then for a mom, because the job of being a mother is, of course, a lifelong pursuit, because you spend all of your time worrying about your kid and making sure that they're well cared for and healthy and happy and well adjusted and have the most successful life possible. So what a mother does for each and every one of us is absolutely astounding, and it's really something that we should do 365 days a year, not just one day a year, is to recognize that miraculous portion of what this life means, to have a mother devoted to you and your life and your well-being. And it's the second year of my lifetime that I've been without my mom, who we lost last February at the age of 86. And it's really, I was talking to Tony off the air here, and it was kind of a weekend, Mother's Day weekend. Didn't have any real plans, didn't have anything going on. I'm not married now, so there are some women in my life that I certainly wrote some very personal notes to and praised them for their performances as a mom. But it's, if your mom is still here, do not miss every opportunity to thank her and spoil her if you can, and really make her feel special, because when that day comes when your mom is not here, it is a really bitter sweet kind of a situation. The memories are even that much better and more treasured, of all the things she was to you in your life. But the fact that she's not here to receive those accolades is really something that's hard to deal with. It was tougher last year because it was just a couple months removed from her passing. This year, a year has gone by. I've gotten kind of used to the fact that she's not here and I can't pick up the phone. But anyway, I just wanted to say thank you to everybody out there listening, who is, performed the greatest labor of love. And that's a really interesting phrase that I just realized is very appropriate for this particular conversation. Labor of love of being a mother. And it's not just the physical act of labor, it's the labor of carrying a child for all that time and then carrying the burden. And it is a burden for a mother to make sure that their child is healthy, happy, and well adjusted in their own lives. So congratulations to all of you wonderful women that have had children and are mothers, and all the people listening today. I don't care that this is the day after Mother's Day. Pick up the phone and call your mom today, because you still can, and let her know how much you appreciate her on just a regular Monday or Tuesday, outside of the official title of Mother's Day, which, like all holidays, has become sort of commercialized. And really the intent is just to make your mom feel special and make her know that how much you appreciate everything, and I mean everything, that she's given, the ultimate selfless act of carrying you, giving birth, and all the things that are involved. So, moms, you are special, and I admire every single one of you on the day after Mother's Day. That was about I don't know, 8 or 9 minutes longer than I intended, which is kind of the MO. Here on Tony Kurre Radio with this show, Need to Know. There's so much to get to. I don't even know where to start. I do want to say that things continue to be confounding in terms of how people interpret situations in our world. They are to me anyway, because I guess one of the real advantages of being around for a while and developing not so much more intellectual ability, but the ability to be very capable of developing clear perspective. I'm at a good point now because I can see through the partisan political BS that goes on with everybody from every side of these issues. My mental alarm is triggered instantaneously a lot of times when somebody's talking about a subject and they are emphasizing things that really kind of slant in their direction, and not actually speaking the truth about a particular issue without the spin on it. And really, this leftist Marxist movement, this globalist New World Order kind of mentality that America is an evil country that is racist and misogynist and all of the different things that we're accused of. All of that is just, it's a crafted message to try to make Americans feel bad about themselves. And here's the worst part of it. If you do have a voice of dissent, if you do say things that call out their BS, you are attacked and you are made to feel like you don't have any soul or heart or consideration for other people. You're just a selfish jackass who who thinks they're better than everybody else and thinks they deserve privileges. It's really the ultimate counter weapon for the people that are trying to tear this country down from the inside, because it can't be assailed from the outside. So they have switched gears. We've got the biggest invasion of human history, anywhere from 10 to 12 million people in our country in the last 3.5 years, correlating with the term of our fossil in chief, Joe Biden. Again, and when I say things like that, People will say, well, you don't politically agree with Biden, so now you're calling him names. That's not what's going on here. I have the utmost respect for the American presidency. I think I've told you here on the program before, it was not unusual for me in grade school, in fourth or fifth grade, sitting in a library when I'm supposed to be doing work on something else, going and grabbing an encyclopedia and just randomly looking at what letter it is. And I already knew my presidents by the time I was 8 or 9 or 10 years old. And I would say, grab the J uh, Encyclopedia Britannica or World Book or whatever might be on the shelf. And I'd say, J, okay, let's look up Thomas Jefferson. And I spent a lot of my time as a kid reading every word about every president because it's something that I've always been really impressed with, and how these people, a lot of them, especially in olden day time, in the original years of our country, how many guys just came from very humble backgrounds to actually occupy the White House. It was not an era of the first 100 years of this country where people were professional politicians and had to be in Washington and being a congressman or a senator or a cabinet member that had to be heavily connected with this long resume. There was never an intention in this country to have a professional politician. That the politicians were supposed to be people selected by the areas they live to go to Washington and serve a term to talk about what's best for their area and represent the feelings and needs of their constituents in their particular place in the country, and then go back home and get back into whatever business they're in. Or a lot of them had to get home in time for harvest season and plow their fields for next year and all that kind of stuff. This whole professional politician thing, and the other thing, of course, that's really screwed up the fruit punch is the need for anyone who really wants to make a serious bid and feels that they have the right stuff to run for office, the money that's involved now just to make that happen for basic things. If you want to run for mayor of a major city or a city council, let alone Congress or the Senate, these gigs have become so lucrative that the fundraising and all the promises you have to make to people that are pouring money into your campaign really ties your hands of being an independent, very productive, and very, I'm going to use the word honest because I can't think of a better word, full integrity filled, maybe is a better way to go. You're beholden to the people who basically pony up the money to get you elected. And that process, just like I said, being a mom doesn't stop when the child is born. Once you're in office, you're starting to raise funds and make promises and back room deals where they're just stuffing your pockets full of checks for your next run, because it is the greatest gig in the world. You've got people of kind of middle class means that go into and happen to pull the right strings and get the right financing to get into Congress, and they go up there and serve in the House of Representatives and the Senate. Next thing you know, they've been there for 25 or 30 years. These people that started off with basically kind of humble backgrounds come out of those careers in Washington, multimillionaires. And these are people that are paid salaries between $175,000 and $190,000, depending on if they're a representative or a senator, less than $200,000. And if you're up there for let's say a 10-year gig, and you're making we'll round it off and say $200,000. I mean, that's a really nice living over a 10-year period. You're making a couple $1,000,000. 20 years, you'd make 4 million. But the fact of the matter is that people that have been there for 20 years or 25 years, they come out worth 35, 40, $50 million. Ask yourself why don't Americans ask the question, why and where does that money come from? And it's pretty damn obvious that it's the greatest opportunity to gravy train that there is. Go to Washington, D.C. and Arlington, Virginia, which is right across the border between D.C. and Virginia, and you will see opulent, gigantic, gated communities that are just breathtaking. My grandmother, Julie Chambers, worked for the government from the mid 30s until she retired in the 70s. And they had a place right on the Chesapeake Bay in Annapolis, Maryland, which is a good 45 minutes from Washington, D.C. They had this fabulous house back in the 50s and all through the 60s before moving to Florida in the 70s. And a couple of years ago, my sons and I were in Washington doing the monument thing and seeing a lot of really interesting places. And because they had never really spent a lot of time, I was actually born in Washington, D.C. and spent the first 9 years of my life there. My dad, who was the only son of my grandmother, the Department of Interior worker for 36 years, a career woman before there was such a thing, was a complete through and through Washingtonian, and got transferred to Atlanta in the late 60s. And so that's how I wound up in Atlanta, where I still consider my hometown. But the bottom line is that on that trip, I really, really wanted to go out and find that property and my grandmother's house that they gave up and sold 50 years ago to a retired general. And we drove out there, and I had the old address. The road that the house was on was called Bywater Road. Not the most original name for a house on the Chesapeake Bay, but it was, BYWATER, all one word. So they lived off Bywater Road. And again, they had this giant lot, for lack of a better term, but it was way out in the country, 45 minutes from our house in Rockville, Maryland, in Metro DC to my grandmother's seemed like forever to me back in that era when I was 7 or 8 years old. The bottom line of all this is when we finally got out there, there was no Bywater Road. Everything was different. And of course, I didn't have great memories because I was just a, 9 or 10-year-old the last time I was there, in right around probably the early 70s. But the bottom line is this area was completely different. We tried to do a little detective work and figure out where to turn and where to go. There was no Bywater Road, and immediately we came up on a fortress, basically a giant iron gate, a guard shack. You could see a couple of houses just on the other side of that. All of that territory that was so country, so far out away from DC, and right on the water. All of those places now are home to just absolutely astounding houses. We talked a little bit to the guard, and he said, yeah, this transition started out here 10 or 12 years ago, and this is just one of a number of neighborhoods. So the point is, there's so much money in government. There's so many people that are basically at the have front and center access to the giant nutritious teats of government, that it has created the greatest growth industry in the history of the world. The American government and all of the elected officials and the administration officials, and astoundingly, tens of thousands of bureaucrats, of people that work in agencies and bureaus and departments. All of these people are riding on the greatest gravy train ever put on the tracks. And that's what exactly it's all about now. And it's not Republican, it's not Democrat. I keep preaching this on this show, that we have the mindset that it's just A against B, it's Democrat against Republican. The biggest difference right now is the Democrats have sold out to a lot of these foreign interests, a lot of the money that a lot of those people are putting in their pockets. And again, we're not just talking about the elected politicians. We're talking about these government workers, which is a laugh, because I don't really think they do that much work at the Environmental Protection Agency or the Department of Education or the Bureau of Tobacco and Firearms. There are a bunch of bureaucrats at desks, and the other really dirty little secret of that, there are another subclass of people around Washington that are the consultants and the hired guns that a lot of these agencies farm the work out to technical firms and other people. So this thing is such a massive conglomerate of all these people just riding the greatest free lunch wagon that's ever been created. And that's why when you get a guy like Donald Trump come into Washington unexpectedly in 2016, that was supposed to be the coronation of Queen Hillary, the smartest person that's ever walked the face of the earth. And if you don't believe it, just ask her. Of course, Trump is now, one of the ridiculous charges he's facing is that he complained about the outcome of the 2020 election. And that was the main part that I was going to get to today. And we'll have a little bit of time when I can do that, because already I'm burning a lot of my airtime. But I thought all this was interesting for you to kind of absorb. But when Trump comes in, somebody who's an outsider, somebody who's going to come in and run, gasp, he's going to run the government like a business. We're doomed. There was just panic in the streets. And immediately the Trump term, starting in 2016, became just a giant inquisition to try and dig up anything real or imagined or contrived that would take Trump down and get him the hell out of there. And then he really sent shockwaves through the Washington bureaucracy when he unveiled a plan late in his first term that he was going to put in place in the second term, which looked like a slam dunk. And that was going to be the absolute ultimate shot over the bow to reform Washington and massive government and the absolute lucrative nature of lifetime positions. Government people have gotten themselves in a union situation and a very compliant federal government because it's not their money. It's not a corporation. They're not worried about spending money that you and me and everybody else contributes the hundreds of billions of dollars that they receive every year from our taxes. It wasn't hard for government employees to basically deal with their own counterparts and come up with all of these ridiculous union guidelines where basically if you get a few years of tenure as a government employee, they can't fire you. You can just be the worst employee ever. You can do absolutely nothing. You can screw up any assignment that you do take on. You can come in at your leisure and do what you want. They can't fire you. Teachers have managed to do this as well because they're negotiating with government. It's really something that Americans need to focus on. There's so many reasons to have term limits for congressmen and senators, which is not going to happen because guess who has to make that law to make that happen? Congressmen and senators. They're not going to cut off their source of revenue and give up their seat on the gravy train. But here's what Trump was going to do in his second term that made him absolutely, positively a guy that had to go. And he was going to, and they had already drafted it and already had the plan. They had found loopholes that they could implement that would basically negate these contracts, these agreements with government worker unions, and make it possible to have mass layoffs and get rid of so many of these people that are doing absolutely nothing except collecting your money. And that just won't stand. This guy is wanting to completely not only shake up the gravy train, he's wanting to derail it and knock it off the track. He had to go. At the same time, Trump had made the Chinese miserable because he had stood up to them for the first administration, Republican or Democrat, in 25 years, that said, this is not going to keep going. I'm gonna charge you, as long as we have this massive trade imbalance where we are on the hook for about 80% deficit in terms of what you take as opposed to what we take from you. Trump slapped them with all kinds of tariffs. He changed a lot of the regulatory structure where companies that had left America were coming back in droves, by cutting the corporate tax rate to historically low levels. The world was aggravated. NATO was aggravated when he went there and told them, look, America's been paying for NATO now for 45 or 50 years. Most of you are barely contributing, and NATO is in place to save your ass and protect you from the Russians. And countries like Germany and some others were barely even, I mean, they're not even close to paying. They're supposed to pay 2% of their gross domestic product. There were countries that were paying less than 0.3%. And Trump said, no more. The free lunch is over. You're going to have to start ponying up because we're not going to pay for this by ourselves anymore. Trump really kind of ruffled a lot of feathers around the world, but he also did some amazing things in the Middle East of going and having actual conversations with the Saudis and United Arab Emirates and other countries. There was relations developing and treaties being put together between Israel and some of these what had been adversarial nations for many, many years. And you can see how that all has unraveled. But Trump had to go. There was global pressure, and there was particularly Washington government pressure that he could not come back in the office. And amazingly, guess what happened with Trump well ahead of any Democrat challenger in polling at the very first of 2020? What convenient timing for a worldwide pandemic, which threw us into, of course, chaos and upheaval, and really kind of made a terrible dent in our economic position. Trump listened to some of the wrong people. He made some mistakes in that process that he would tell you right now. And I have a couple of associates and former employers that still have very close relationships with Donald Trump. I have been told that Trump will speak to you for hours about the mistakes he made in handling the whole COVID-19 situation that was engineered by a lot of nefarious parties, because what it really did and what it was really designed to do was to take away the inevitability of him being reelected and open the door to a bunch of provisions and laws and procedures in all kinds of corners of the country that imposed emergency measures to the purpose of conducting the election in 2020, which gave them the latitude, the people that were behind this. And again, the biggest people are our own citizens that are in government, that they could finagle a lot of what happened. And don't forget the famous quote by Joseph Stalin, one of the worst desperate dictators in the history of the world. His quote was, "It doesn't matter who casts the votes. What matters is who counts the votes." George Soros and a lot of these worldwide sources have put millions and millions of dollars in to affect elections in small towns, in counties, in rural areas, in a lot of major cities, to get the right people in the jobs in elections that usually don't require you to have a big bankroll. Now they're spreading money around. People are getting into these district attorneys positions, secretaries of state for states, different county officials that are in charge of conducting elections. They own a lot of those people who are beholden to them for getting them their positions. So it was a well-oiled machine in 2020. And I was going to give a lot of details, and I don't have time now. I need to wrap this up, so we'll do it next week. But there was a release this week from the Georgia Election Board, who has been looking into allegations that there were irregularities in Fulton County, home of District Attorney Fani Willis, by the way, and the great charges against Donald Trump for a RICO case, which meant he was running a organized crime unit trying to overturn the 2020 election. The irony of that is Fulton County is being investigated, and there's a lot of findings already leaking out that there was major irregularities in the 2020 election in Fulton County, and no doubt DeKalb, both the biggest entities in population in the state of Georgia, where ballots were routinely being scanned more than one time. The Dominion election systems, the machines, had the capability of being programmed to do just about anything. And there were witnesses in those counts that finally got the election board to investigate, and they are finding massive amounts of ballots that were scanned more than once. And you can bet your bottom dollar that those ballots were not marked for President Donald Trump. They were for his opposition, one Joe Biden, who ended up with 90 million votes nationally. That was about 15 million more than any presidential candidate had ever received in an American election. And you're going to tell me that in 2016, when 130 million Americans voted in the election, this past election in 2020, that number went from 130 million people voted to approximately 165 million. So you had 35 million more people come out of the woodwork and vote than you did in the previous election in a pandemic where you can't even leave your house. All of the different things that were available as far as ballot harvesting, as far as mail-in ballots, as far as drop-off locations, all seriously abused. And when I wrote my article about this, the feedback I got is you're just a sore loser. They're missing the whole point. I find the whole exercise of Fulton County, going back now 4 years after the fact, when the damage is done. The Biden administration has been an absolute disaster for this country. We are in such a circle the drain mode right now, domestically and internationally. The damage is done. The point of my article totally missed. I'm not belly aching that Donald Trump was denied the presidency. I'm not a Donald Trump lover or fanatic. I was simply pointing out that this big investigation by the Georgia Election Board is totally useless. 4 years later, what's it going to prove? My favorite aspect of that was already from the board's findings, they have issued some fines, and get ready for this, they have issued some reprimands. I've been reprimanded for engineering cheating in the 2020 election. The damage is done, and the point of my story was, who cares? I got barbecued by a bunch of conservatives back in 2021 when Arizona was doing one of these investigations and found tons of irregularities, and we could spend a lot of time listing those. But basically, these people were actually excited on what was then still Twitter that this was going to overturn the election, all these irregularities that were found. And I said, folks, get real. Biden's been sworn in. He's been president almost a whole year. There's not going to be any overturn. There's not going to be, what are they going to do? it's like the Kentucky Derby. Oh, that horse failed the drug test, so now this horse is the winner. That's not how politics works. Once you have the big day in January and the new president raises his hand and swears to uphold the Constitution and protect and defend this country, the game's over. And so anybody who thinks I'm some kind of radical right-wing nut needs to be served with the notice that you have to make sure that everything's above board while it's happening. After the fact is a waste of time and a waste of energy for everybody. Hopefully, the only good thing that will come out of this and similar investigations all around the country of the things that I just mentioned to you is that this Republican Party may wake up and realize that they better be a lot more diligent. I was worried for the Georgia Senate runoff after the clear shenanigans during the presidential election in Georgia, where it took DeKalb and Fulton County 3 or 4 days to count their votes. And Trump went from a big lead in Georgia to losing because I guess every vote that was still not counted were all for Joe Biden. Fancy that. What a coincidence. But the runoff election a couple of months later for 2 Senate seats that were going to determine the balance of power in the Senate, I wrote articles leading up to that is I hope people in Georgia are not going to let this happen again and are going to have a clamp down and make sure this election is fair and regulated and counted properly. And lo and behold, both Democrats in a state that had been historically red won those runoffs, including John Ossoff, who was totally not qualified to be a United States senator. He was a documentary filmmaker. Well, his documentary films were YouTube variety. He was just a goofball who's managed to be elected to the Senate. He lost to Purdue, the sitting senator, in the general election, but then miraculously beat him in the runoff. So anyway, the whole thing stinks to high heaven, and it's a waste of time. But this country needs, as an absolute lifeblood institution, free and fair elections are vital to making this country work. And every American should be interested in that, because at one point, and this has come very close, and we'll see what happens in this election, this Democrat party that's been hijacked by fanatics is dangerously close to getting in a position where they'll never lose another election. And the same thing could happen if the script flips and the Republicans ever get in charge and are able to impose a lot of things that make our free and fair elections a joke, because they won't be they might be free, but they're not going to be fair. And that is something that this country has to have to operate properly. I'm Kip Kiefer. That's what you need to know this week. I hope everybody, once again, gives their mom a call today and a little extra bonus. Let's have a bonus Mother's Day week, because they deserve at least that much, if not 365 days a year. Have a great week, everybody. I hope all of your initiatives come to pass and all your dreams come true. We'll talk to you next week here on TKR.
This has been a special presentation of Tony Kurre Radio.